My heart dropped like a stone when Maurice slammed the termination letter onto my desk. "You're disposable, Billy. There are 100 people like you waiting outside for this job." His voice dripped with venom, each word designed to cut deep. I stood frozen in my own office, the space I'd built over 3 years of grueling work, late nights, and countless presentations that had saved this department millions. Now this man was throwing me out like yesterday's garbage. My hands trembled as I stared at the crisp white paper. I was an Omega, yes, but I'd never let that define my worth. I'd fought tooth and nail to prove myself in this corporate world that treated people like me as second-class citizens. Yet here was Maurice, wielding his power like a weapon, using my designation against me in ways I'd spent years trying to overcome. The humiliation burned through my chest, mixing with rage and helplessness in equal measure. "Sign it, Billy, or security will escort you out in front of everyone." He smiled, that smug, self-satisfied expression that made my stomach turn. I stood there caught between surrender and defiance, between my pride and my survival. Around us, colleagues pretended to work at their desks, but I could feel their eyes on me. Nobody spoke up. Nobody defended me. Fear kept them silent, just as it had kept me silent so many times before. I knew what signing meant. It meant accepting his narrative, that I was just another replaceable cog in the machine, that my contributions meant nothing, that 3 years of my life could be erased with a signature. But what choice did I have? Maurice controlled everything here. He had the board's ear, the executive's trust, and the power to destroy what little career I'd managed to build. Then something inside me snapped. Maybe it was the way he kept smiling, or maybe it was the memory of every late night I'd spent perfecting reports while he took credit in boardrooms. Whatever it was, I made my decision. Without a word, I turned and walked out of that office, leaving the unsigned letter on the desk behind me. My shoulders straightened as I moved through the corridor, refusing to let him see me break. The moment I stepped into the hallway, something shifted in the air. A scent hit me, rich sandalwood mixed with smoke and something darker, more primal. My Omega instinct sparked to life immediately. This was an alpha's scent, but not just any alpha. This carried power, dominance, the kind of presence that made the air itself feel heavier. My body shivered involuntarily as I tried to process what I was sensing. I moved toward the elevators, desperately trying to hold back tears. Someone powerful was in this building, but why? And why today of all days? As I reached for the elevator button, I heard rapid footsteps and a breathless voice. "Third floor. Conference room." Immediately, "He's already here." An assistant rushed past me toward the main entrance, her face flushed with anxiety. Curiosity pulled at me, but I kept walking. Whatever crisis was unfolding upstairs had nothing to do with me anymore. I was done with this place, done with Maurice, done with being treated as expendable. When I reached the lobby, however, I couldn't help but notice the receptionist on her phone, her voice tight with nervous energy. "Yes, Mr. Carter just arrived. Full acquisition," they said. "He's heading to the executive floor now." She paused, listening. "I don't know the details, just that the board called an emergency meeting." Carter. The name struck me like lightning. I'd heard stories about Darren Carter, the alpha who'd systematically dismantled 3 major corporations through sheer strategic brilliance, who commanded boardrooms with a single glance, whose business empire had grown exponentially in just 5 years. And he was here, in my building. My former building, I corrected myself bitterly. My heart began to race. Was this coincidence, or was something bigger happening? Part of me wanted to go back upstairs, to see Maurice's face when he realized what was coming. But I stopped myself. What did it matter now? I was already out. Whatever happened next wouldn't change my situation. Then I turned toward the main exit, and my entire world tilted. He stood by the elevator, tall and commanding in a sharp black suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary. His gray eyes were fixed directly on me, not scanning the lobby, not looking past me, but focused with laser precision on my face. The scent that had filled the corridor intensified, and I realized with a jolt that it was coming from him, Darren Carter himself, and he was staring at me like he'd been searching for me specifically. The lobby seemed to fade away. Other people moved around us, but they felt distant, irrelevant. Those cold gray eyes held mine with an intensity that made it impossible to look away. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe properly. Every omega instinct I possessed screamed at me to lower my gaze, to submit to this overwhelming presence. But something kept me locked in place. You. His voice was quiet, controlled, yet it cut through the ambient noise like a blade. Come with me. I should have questioned it. Should have asked why or demanded to know how he even knew who I was. But my feet moved of their own accord, following him into the elevator. The doors closed, sealing us in together, and the scent became almost overwhelming in the confined space. Neither of us spoke as the elevator climbed. I watched the floor numbers light up, 3rd floor, where the executive conference room waited. My mind raced with possibilities. How did Darren Carter know my name? Why had he singled me out in a lobby full of people? Was I somehow part of whatever acquisition he was planning? None of it made sense. I'd never met him before, never even seen him in person until 30 seconds ago. I was nobody, just a fired employee about to leave this building for the last time. The elevator chimed softly as we reached our destination. Darren stepped out first, not looking back to see if I followed. But I did. Of course I did. Something about this moment felt inevitable, like my entire morning had been leading to this exact point. The humiliation from Maurice, the termination, even my decision not to sign, it all suddenly felt like pieces of a puzzle I didn't yet understand. As we approached the conference room, I could hear raised voices inside. Maurice's voice, specifically, sounding defensive and angry. Darren's hand rested on the door handle for just a moment before he pushed it open. And when I saw what waited inside, Maurice's pale, shocked face, the nervous board members, the scattered legal documents, I realized that my life was about to change in ways I couldn't possibly predict. Walking beside Darren felt surreal, like moving through a dream where everything was sharper and more vivid than reality should allow. He said nothing, just moved forward with measured confidence while I struggled to keep pace behind him. His scent continued to affect me in ways I wasn't prepared for, making my omega biology respond despite my attempts to stay professional and detached. I kept my expression neutral, refusing to show how much his presence unsettled me. When we entered the conference room, the scene before me was almost worth the morning's earlier humiliation. Maurice stood near the head of the table, and the transformation in him was remarkable. Gone was the smug authority figure who'd dismissed me an hour ago. This Maurice looked small, frightened, his usual confidence completely shattered. 3 senior board members sat awkwardly in their chairs, shuffling papers that clearly meant nothing in this moment. Mr. Carter, I wasn't informed you'd be personally overseeing. Maurice's voice cracked halfway through the sentence, so different from the cruel certainty he'd used with me earlier. Darren raised one hand and Maurice fell silent immediately. The gesture wasn't aggressive or dramatic, just a simple movement that carried absolute authority. Then Darren placed a thick folder on the conference table, the sound of it hitting the polished wood echoing in the sudden quiet. As of 9 o'clock this morning, I've acquired 87% of this company's controlling shares. The board has already approved the transition. Darren's voice remained level, almost conversational, which somehow made his words more devastating. You're resigning effective immediately, Maurice. No negotiation, no severance package, no recommendations. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the air conditioning seemed to hold its breath. I stood near the wall trying to process what I was hearing. He'd bought the company. Today, the entire acquisition must have been planned for weeks, maybe months. Yet I'd known nothing about it. Nobody had. The speed and efficiency of it was staggering. Maurice's face flushed red, anger fighting with fear. This is impossible. You can't just. This is my legacy. I built this department from nothing. I made this division profitable. Darren's gaze could have frozen fire. Maurice's protest died in his throat as those cold gray eyes fixed on him with complete indifference. You built nothing. You took credit for other people's work, intimidated employees into silence, and created a toxic environment that's been hemorrhaging talent for 2 years. I have documentation of every instance. He gestured to the folder. You have 48 hours to clear out your personal belongings. Security will be monitoring your exit. Then Darren turned slightly, looking directly at me, and my heart nearly stopped. Billy is under my protection now. Any attempt to contact him, approach him, or damage his professional reputation will result in immediate legal action, both civil and criminal charges. Am I understand? Hearing my name spoken in that commanding voice sent shockwaves through me. How did he know who I was? We'd never met, never spoken, never even been in the same building as far as I knew. This couldn't be random. Nothing about this felt random. Maurice's eyes found me across the room, burning with blame and hatred, as if I'd somehow orchestrated his downfall. I met his gaze steadily until he looked away first. He gathered what remained of his dignity and stormed out, not bothering with the formality of goodbyes. The board members followed shortly after, murmuring awkward acknowledgments to Darren before making their escape. Then it was just the two of us in that large conference room, and the weight of everything crashed down on me all at once. Sit down. It wasn't quite a command, but it wasn't a suggestion either. I sank into one of the leather chairs, my legs suddenly unsteady. Darren moved to the window, hands in his pockets, seeming to collect his thoughts before speaking again. Tell me what happened this morning. Why were you in the lobby looking like you'd just had your world pulled out from under you? The question caught me off guard. I'd expected many things, but not personal interest in my situation. Maurice terminated my employment, I said quietly, looking at my hands. He called me disposable, said I was easily replaced. Darren's jaw tightened visibly. When he turned back to face me, something had changed in his expression, a flash of genuine anger that went beyond business concerns. Do you believe that? That you're disposable? I thought about lying, about giving him the expected humble response. But something about those gray eyes demanded honesty. No, I've never believed that. I know my worth, even if Maurice refused to see it. Good answer. Darren moved closer, leaning against the table's edge. Because starting today, you work directly for me, personal assistant to the CEO. Strategic operations, high-level decision-making, access to confidential projects. Your salary will be triple your current former rate, with full benefits and equity options. My brain struggled to catch up with his words. I don't understand. Why would you? We've never even met. You don't know anything about my qualifications or my work history, or I know everything about your qualifications, Billy. He pulled out his phone, scrolling briefly before showing me the screen. It was my personnel file, complete with performance reviews, project summaries, and detailed notes about presentations I'd given. I've been watching this company for 6 months, evaluating every key player. You stood out immediately. The implication of that statement hit me hard. 6 months? He'd been observing me for half a year without my knowledge. Studying my work, tracking my contributions. It should have felt invasive, maybe even creepy, but instead I felt something else entirely. Validation. Someone had actually been paying attention while Maurice took credit for my innovations. The investor presentation last March, Darren continued, putting his phone away. You challenged Maurice's projections with hard data. Your risk assessment model saved this division from a catastrophic merger that would have bankrupted them within 18 months. Maurice tried to bury your report, but I saw it. I see everything. He crept up my neck as I remembered that presentation. I thought my career was over after contradicting Maurice so publicly, but the numbers had been wrong and I'd refused to stay silent. You were there? In that meeting, observer status, I had people watching this company's operations closely. He straightened, his full attention focused on me. I need someone I can trust in my inner circle, Billy. Someone who values truth over politics, who won't compromise their integrity for approval. That's not something you can fake or learn. Either you have it or you don't. You have it. The offer hung between us, massive and terrifying and impossibly tempting. This was Darren Carter, one of the most powerful business leaders in the country, offering me a position that would change everything about my life and career. But I had to ask the question burning in my mind. Why do I feel like this is about more than just business? His expression shifted, something almost like surprise crossing his features before he controlled it. Maybe because you're perceptive enough to recognize when something matters beyond the bottom line. We'll discuss the contract details tomorrow. For now, go home. Process everything that's happened. I'll have my assistant send you the paperwork tonight. As I stood to leave, still reeling, Darren spoke once more. Billy, you were never disposable. Remember that. I walked out of that conference room knowing my entire world had just been rebuilt from scratch. And somehow, impossibly, I trusted the man who'd done the rebuilding. I signed the contract the next morning after reading every single clause twice, consulting with a lawyer friend who couldn't believe the terms Darren was offering. By noon, I was officially his personal assistant. By evening, I was sitting in his car watching the city lights blur past as we drove toward his penthouse in the financial district. "I could drop you at your place," Darren said without taking his eyes off the road. His driving was smooth, controlled, like everything else about him. "But we need to review the quarterly reports tonight. There's a board presentation tomorrow morning and I want your input on the financial projections." I stayed quiet, watching his hands on the steering wheel. Strong hands, long fingers that moved with precise confidence. When he glanced over at me briefly, I looked away, suddenly conscious of how closely I'd been observing him. This was my boss now. I needed to maintain professional boundaries, no matter how much my omega instincts responded to his presence. The penthouse was everything I'd expected and nothing I was prepared for. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a panoramic view of the city skyline, lights twinkling like stars brought down to earth. The furniture was minimal but clearly expensive, every piece chosen for both function and aesthetic appeal. And everywhere, subtle but unmistakable, was that sandalwood scent I'd first encountered in the office lobby. "Make yourself comfortable," Darren said, moving toward a sleek bar area. "Would you prefer coffee or something stronger? We'll be working for a few hours." I settled carefully onto a modern couch that probably cost more than my car. "Coffee is fine. Black? No sugar." He nodded approvingly and busied himself with an expensive-looking espresso machine. I took the opportunity to study the space more carefully. There were no personal photographs, no artwork that revealed anything about his tastes or history. Everything was deliberately neutral, carefully curated to show nothing of the man who lived here. It felt lonely somehow, despite the luxury. When he handed me the coffee and sat down in the chair across from me, the professional distance felt almost physical. He opened his laptop, pulling up spreadsheets and financial models that would take hours to properly analyze. We worked in focused silence for a while, the only sounds the clicking of keyboards and occasional questions about data sources or projection assumptions. But as the night deepened and the coffee disappeared, something shifted. Maybe it was the lateness of the hour, or the intimacy of working alone together in his private space, but the walls between us began to feel less solid. "Can I ask you something?" I spoke up during a lull in the spreadsheet review. "Why did you really hire me? The truth, not the business justification." Darren sat back, studying me with those penetrating gray eyes. For a long moment he didn't answer, just looked at me like he was deciding how much truth to offer. Finally he closed his laptop and set it aside. "Do you know what it's like to be surrounded by people who only tell you what they think you want to hear?" His voice was quieter now, more personal. "I built an empire on strategy and calculated risk, but somewhere along the way I lost the ability to trust anyone's motives. Everyone wants something from me. Access, money, connections, power. Everyone except you." I frowned, confused. "You don't know that. You don't know what I want. I watched you challenge Maurice when it would have been smarter to stay quiet. I saw you walk away from a severance package most people would have grabbed desperately. You have principles, Billy. Real ones. Not the thin people perform for audiences." He leaned forward slightly. "That presentation last March, you weren't trying to impress anyone. You were trying to prevent a disaster because it was the right thing to do. That's rare. That's valuable in ways that have nothing to do with business." The intensity in his words made my chest tight. Nobody had ever spoken about me like this, seen me this clearly. "You're making me sound like some kind of corporate hero. I'm just someone who couldn't stomach watching a bad decision happen in slow motion." "Exactly." Darren smiled then. A real smile, not the polite expression he wore in meetings. "You care about outcomes more than optics. You'd rather be right than popular. And you're sitting here in my penthouse at 11 at night reviewing financial models instead of celebrating your new position. You're exactly what I need." The air between us felt charged suddenly, heavy with implications neither of us was ready to address directly. I cleared my throat, looking down at my laptop to break the intensity of the moment. "We should finish these projections. You said the presentation is early tomorrow, Billy." He said my name like it meant something, like it carried weight. Look at me. I did, and immediately regretted it because the expression on his face was too honest, too vulnerable. This wasn't the cold CEO who'd demolished Maurice's career that morning. This was something else entirely. Someone who was tired of wearing masks. I need you to understand something, Darren continued. This job, this opportunity I'm offering you, it's real. The professional benefits are exactly as outlined in your contract. But I'd be lying if I said that was the only reason I wanted you here. My heart started racing. What are you saying? I'm saying that 6 months ago, I walked into a conference room, intending to evaluate a potential acquisition. Instead, I saw an Omega stand up to a bully with nothing but facts and conviction. I saw someone who was to be diminished, who fought for what was right even when it was dangerous, and I haven't been able to stop thinking about it since. The confession hung in the air between us, impossible to take back. I should have been alarmed, should have recognized this as a complication that could destroy the professional relationship we were trying to build. But instead, all I felt was a strange sense of recognition, like something inside me had been waiting for exactly these words. This is complicated, I said carefully. You're my boss now. There are power dynamics here that we can't just ignore. I know. Darren stood up, moving to the windows. Which is why I'm telling you now, before anything happens, that you have complete autonomy. If you want this to stay purely professional, it will. If you decide tomorrow or next week or next year that you want to work somewhere else, I'll write you a recommendation that will get you hired anywhere in the country. No retaliation, no consequences. He turned back to face me, backlit by the city lights. But I also need you to know that when I look at you, I see someone extraordinary, someone I want to know beyond quarterly reports and board presentations. And if there's any chance you might feel something similar, I'd like the opportunity to explore that. On your terms. At your pace. The honesty in his voice undid something inside me. Here was one of the most powerful men in business, offering me complete control, making himself vulnerable in ways that clearly terrified him. And despite every logical reason to keep this professional, I couldn't deny the pull I felt toward him. I need time to think about this, I said finally. Everything's happened so fast. 2 days ago I was being fired. Now I'm here and you're offering me things I didn't even know I wanted. Take all the time you need. Darren's relief was visible. The professional relationship stands regardless. I meant what I said, you earned this position. Everything else is just possibility. We finished the financial review in a different kind of silence after that. One charged with potential rather than mere professionalism. When he finally drove me home near midnight, his hand brushed mine as I got out of the car, and the contact sent electricity through my entire body. As I watched his taillights disappear into the night, I knew with absolute certainty that my life had changed forever. The only question was whether I was brave enough to let it change in all the ways it wanted to. Walking into the office the next morning felt like entering an entirely different universe. Eyes followed me everywhere. Colleagues who'd barely acknowledged my existence now tracked my every movement with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. I was Darren Carter's personal assistant now, which apparently made me untouchable in the corporate hierarchy. People stepped aside in hallways, conversations died when I approached, and suddenly everyone knew my name. Most of the attention I could handle. It was uncomfortable but understandable given the dramatic circumstances of my promotion. What I hadn't anticipated was the hostility from certain quarters, particularly from Alberto, Maurice's former deputy. He was a tall, arrogant alpha who'd always made a point of invading my personal space during conversations, using his physical presence to establish dominance in subtle ways. I was in the break room mid-morning, preparing coffee and trying to review some notes on my phone, when Alberto appeared in the doorway. His smile was all teeth and no warmth as he approached, deliberately standing closer than necessary. Well, Billy Watson, rising star. That was quite the promotion you landed. Congratulations on your new position. His hand landed heavily on my shoulder, fingers gripping with just enough pressure to cross the line from friendly to invasive. My jaw tightened, but I kept my voice level. Thank you, Alberto. I appreciate the acknowledgement. I tried to step away, but his grip held firm. I'm just curious about one thing though. His voice dropped lower, taking on an insinuating quality that made my skin crawl. What exactly did you do to impress Carter so thoroughly? I mean, we all know how these rapid promotions usually work, especially when an Omega catches a powerful alpha's attention. Those late-night strategy sessions must be very educational. The implication hung in the air like poison. My hands curled into fists at my sides, coffee forgotten on the counter behind me. Whatever you're imagining in that narrow mind of yours, Alberto, I suggest you keep it to yourself. My promotion was based on merit and professional competence. If you have an issue with that, perhaps you should examine why you feel threatened by someone else's success. Alberto raised his hands in mock surrender, though his smirk never wavered. Hey, no judgment here. I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. Your job description seems awfully intimate for a standard assistant role. Following the boss around, attending private meetings, working alone together until all hours. It's natural for people to wonder about the nature of your relationship. The rage building in my chest was interrupted by a voice from the doorway, cold, controlled, and absolutely lethal. Alberto. We both turned. Darren stood in the entrance to the break room and the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. His presence filled the space completely, making everyone else seem insignificant by comparison. The handful of other employees who'd been pretending not to listen suddenly remembered urgent tasks elsewhere, filing out quickly and quietly. My office. Right now. It wasn't a request. Alberto's confident expression cracked slightly. His hand finally dropped from my shoulder as he straightened his tie with false composure. Of course, Mr. Carter. I was just congratulating Billy on his new role. Now, Alberto. I watched through the glass walls as they entered Darren's office. Darren closed the door with deliberate care, then turned to face Alberto with an expression I'd never seen before. Not angry exactly, but radiating such controlled fury that even from a distance I could see Alberto physically recoil. The conversation lasted perhaps 5 minutes. Though I couldn't hear the words, what I could see was Alberto's body language transforming from defensive justification to genuine fear. His usual swagger completely evaporated. When Alberto emerged, his face was flushed deep red, whether from shame or suppressed anger, I couldn't tell. He wouldn't meet my eyes as he walked stiffly back to his desk, moving like someone who'd just been thoroughly and professionally dismantled. Darren appeared in his doorway and gestured for me to join him. I entered his office and closed the door, suddenly aware of how the glass walls made us visible to the entire floor. What did you say? And Darren moved to his desk, his movements sharp with residual anger. I informed him that any further physical contact with you, any inappropriate comments, or any attempts to spread speculation about our working relationship would result in immediate matinine, without references, and that I have excellent lawyers who would be delighted to pursue harassment charges if necessary. I should have felt vindicated, but instead I felt oddly conflicted. You didn't need to threaten him on my behalf. I can handle people like Alberto. I know you can. Darren finally looked at me directly, his gray eyes intense. That's not why I did it. I didn't intervene because I think you're incapable of defending yourself. I intervened because what he was implying was disrespectful not just to you but to the professional relationship we're building. And because he stopped himself, jaw tightening. Because what? I moved closer, genuinely curious about what he'd been about to say. Darren turned toward the window, hands sliding into his pockets in what I was beginning to recognize as a gesture he used when wrestling with something he didn't want to admit. Because the thought of him touching you, of anyone treating you as less than you deserve, makes me want to demolish their entire career. And I needed him to understand that you're under my protection now, whether that's professionally appropriate or not. The honesty in his words hit me squarely in the chest. This wasn't possessiveness in the toxic sense, it was something more fundamental. Protection. Care. The kind of fierce loyalty I'd never experienced from anyone before. Darren, we have the board presentation in 3 hours. He cut me off smoothly, retreating back into professional mode so quickly it gave me whiplash. I need you to review the financial projections one more time. Make sure all the supporting documentation is in order. This acquisition has to go perfectly or we'll have regulatory issues that could tie us up for months. I recognized the deflection for what it was. His way of maintaining boundaries he clearly struggled with. But I also recognized that something between us had shifted again. The professional lines we'd drawn were becoming increasingly difficult to maintain, and we both knew it. I'll have everything ready within the hour. As I left his office, I caught Alberto watching from across the room. His expression was resentful but wary, and he looked away the moment our eyes met. Whatever Darren had said to him had clearly made an impact. The thought should have brought me satisfaction. But instead I found myself thinking about Darren's admission, the raw honesty in his voice when he talked about wanting to protect me. The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings and presentations. The board approved the acquisition unanimously, impressed by the thoroughness of our preparation and the strength of the financial analysis I'd helped compile. Through it all, I was hyper-aware of Darren beside me, the way he consulted me openly in front of executives who outranked me by decades, the respect he showed my opinions, the subtle pride in his expression when my projections proved accurate. By the time we returned to his office late that afternoon, I was exhausted but exhilarated. We'd accomplished something significant today, and I'd been a genuine part of it, not just an assistant carrying files, but a real contributor whose insights had mattered. "You did excellent work today," Darren said as I gathered my things to leave. The board was impressed. So was I. "I had good material to work with," I replied, slipping my laptop into my bag. "Your strategy was sound. I just helped present it clearly." "Billy." He waited until I looked up at him. "Learn to take a compliment. You earned this. Stop attributing your success to everyone but yourself." The gentle reprimand made me smile despite myself. "Old habits. I'll work on it." As I headed for the elevator, I realized that for the first time in my professional life, I felt genuinely valued. Not just for what I could produce, but for who I was. And that feeling, more than else that had happened, was what made leaving each evening increasingly difficult. 3 days later, we were still in the office at 11 at night, surrounded by merger documents and acquisition reports that needed review before the regulatory filing deadline. The building was silent around us except for the distant hum of climate control and the occasional sound of security making their rounds. We'd been working for 6 hours straight, barely speaking except to discuss contract clauses and financial structures. But the silence between us had changed. It was comfortable now, familiar in a way that suggested an intimacy beyond mere professional collaboration. Darren would occasionally ask for coffee. I'd refill both our cups without being asked. I'd pass him files before he requested them, anticipating what he'd need next. We developed a rhythm that felt natural, almost instinctive. When the clock finally struck 11, Darren closed his laptop and rolled his shoulders, grimacing slightly at the stiffness. "When did you last eat something substantial?" The question caught me off guard. Lunch, I think. Around 1. He stood up, stretching properly. "That's unacceptable. Come on. We're taking a break. There's a diner 2 blocks from here that stays open late. We'll grab food, clear our heads, then if we're capable of continuing tonight or if this needs to wait until morning." 20 minutes later, we were sitting across from each other in a worn vinyl booth, surrounded by the comforting smell of coffee and grilled food. The diner was nearly empty at this hour, just us, a tired waitress, and a couple of truck drivers at the counter. Darren had left his suit jacket in the car, loosened his tie and rolled up his sleeves. Without the armor of his business attire, he looked younger, more approachable, human in a way his office persona never quite achieved. "You're always so controlled at work," I observed, watching him study the menu even though we both knew he'd probably order the same thing I would. "Something simple and filling. Do you ever just let go? Relax completely?" Darren glanced up, something flickering in his expression. "Rarely. When you're responsible for thousands of jobs, billions in assets, you don't get the luxury of relaxing. Every decision has consequences that ripple up further than most people imagine. The weight of that doesn't just disappear when I leave the office." "That sounds exhausting," I said quietly. "Carrying that burden constantly." "It is." He set down the menu, giving me his full attention in that intense way of his. "Which is why these moments matter. Sitting here with someone who doesn't want anything from me except honest conversation and decent food. This is as close to relaxing as I get." The waitress appeared and we ordered identical meals: burgers, fries, coffee. When she left, I leaned forward slightly. "Can I ask you something personal?" "You can ask." I reserved the right not to answer. But his slight smile suggested he probably would. "Why did you really choose me? I know you've explained the professional reasons, but there's something you're not saying. I can feel it." Darren was quiet for a long moment, fingers drumming against the table in an unusual display of nervousness. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower, more vulnerable than I'd ever heard it. "Because you reminded me that there's more to existence than acquisition and dominance. That presentation 6 months ago, watching you stand your ground against Maurice, seeing you fight for what was correct even though it endangered your position, It woke something in me I'd thought was dead. He paused as the waitress delivered our coffee, then continued. I built my empire by being ruthless, by viewing every interaction as a transaction, every relationship as a strategic alliance. And I was successful, wildly successful, but somewhere in that process, I forgot what it felt like to connect with someone genuinely, to care about a person rather than what they could provide. Then I saw you, and I remember, my throat felt tight. That's a lot of pressure to put on someone you barely knew. I know. Which is why I didn't approach you directly. Why I waited, watched, made sure I understood who you really were before making any moves. I needed to know if that moment in the conference room was authentic or performance. Turns out it was real. Everything about you is real, Billy, and that's intoxicating to someone who lives in a world of carefully constructed images. The food arrived, giving me a moment to process his words. We ate in silence for a while, but it was charged with unspoken things. Finally, I set down my burger and looked at him directly. I'm tired too, you know. Tired of constantly proving I'm worthy of basic respect. Tired of fighting to be seen as competent rather than just an omega who got lucky. Tired of wondering if I'll ever find someone who values me for myself rather than what I represent or what I can provide. Darren's hand moved across the table, covering mine with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with his usual controlled precision. Then stop fighting. At least with me. You don't have to prove anything, Billy. You're already more than enough. The touch sent electricity through my entire body. This wasn't casual, wasn't accidental. This was deliberate, intentional. A crossing of the professional boundaries we'd been carefully maintaining. And I didn't pull away. This is dangerous, I whispered. What we're doing here. The lines were blurring. I know. His thumb traced slow circles on my knuckles, the gesture both soothing and incendiary. Which is why I need you to be certain about what you want. I can keep this professional if that's what you need. I can be just your employer, just your colleague, and nothing more. But if there's any possibility that you feel even a fraction of what I'm feeling, I do. The words escaped before I could stop them. I feel it too. Whatever this is between us, I feel it, and it terrifies me because I've never wanted anything this much. I don't know how to handle that. Darren's expression transformed, something like relief and joy and desire all mixing together. We'll figure it out. Together. At whatever pace you need. But I need you to know that this isn't just physical attraction or convenience. When I look at you, I see a partner, someone I want beside me not just in boardrooms but in life. Someone worth risking everything for. The confession hung between us too big and too honest to take back. When he drove me home an hour later, his hand found mine again in the darkness of the car. Fingers intertwining with a certainty that felt inevitable. As I watched him drive away from my apartment building, I realized I'd stopped fighting what I wanted. For the first time in years, I was allowing myself to simply feel, to hope, to imagine a future that included someone who saw me completely and chose me anyway. A week passed in a blur of work and stolen moments. Hands brushing during file exchanges, meaningful glances across conference tables, late dinners that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with learning each other's histories and dreams. The professional relationship remained solid, but underneath it ran a current of something deeper, something that grew stronger each day. We were careful at the office, maintaining appropriate distance, but everyone could sense the shift. The air between us practically hummed with potential. Then Maurice reappeared, drunk and bitter at an industry networking event I'd attended solo. Darren had been tied up in merger negotiations across town, and I'd assured him I could handle the event independently. I was talking with a potential client when Maurice materialized from the crowd, his eyes glassy and his movements unsteady. Billy Watson, he slurred, moving too close. The golden boy himself. How's life as Carter's pet project? His breath reeked of expensive whiskey consumed too quickly. I stepped back, maintaining composure despite the spike of anxiety in my chest. Maurice, you're drunk. Go home, sleep it off and leave me alone. Leave you alone? His voice rose, attracting attention from nearby attendees. You destroyed everything I'd built. My career, my reputation, my legacy, all gone because you couldn't keep your mouth shut and your legs closed. The crude accusation made several people gasp. I felt my face flush with humiliation and rage. That's completely inappropriate and factually incorrect. Your termination had nothing to do with me and everything to do with your own incompetence and cruelty. Now step back before you make this worse for yourself." Instead, Maurice grabbed my arm, fingers digging in painfully as he tried to pull me toward a less crowded corridor. His alpha scent spiked aggressively, an attempt to intimidate me into submission. "Don't you dare walk away from me when I'm talking to you. You're going to listen to exactly what I think of." His words cut off abruptly as someone seized his wrist with crushing force, twisting his arm away from me with controlled violence. Darren had appeared seemingly from nowhere, his face a mask of cold fury that made Maurice's aggressive display look like a child's tantrum. "Remove your hands from him. Now." The command in Darren's voice was absolute. Maurice struggled weakly, but Darren's grip was iron. With deliberate precision, he forced Maurice's hand to release me, then twisted his arm just enough to make the threat of real damage clear. "This is your final warning, and I'm only giving it because we're in a public venue. If you approach Billy again, if you speak to him, if you so much as look in his direction, I will destroy whatever's left of your pathetic career so thoroughly that you'll never work in this industry again." And that's before the criminal harassment charges. Am I making myself clear? Maurice's face had gone from red to white. He nodded frantically, and Darren released him with a look of disgust. Maurice stumbled away, disappearing into the crowd without another word. Several people had witnessed the confrontation, their expressions ranging from shock to approval. Darren turned to me immediately, hands gentle on my shoulders as he scanned for injuries. "Did he hurt you? Are you all right?" "I'm fine," I managed, though my hands were shaking with adrenaline. "Just shaken up. I didn't expect him to be here, didn't think he'd be stupid enough to come with me." Darren guided me through the venue and out onto a private terrace, away from prying eyes and curious whispers. The night air was cool against my flushed face, city lights spreading out below us in a carpet of illumination. For a moment we just stood there, both catching our breath. Then Darren cupped my face in both hands, his touch infinitely careful despite the violence he'd just displayed. "I can't keep doing this, Billy. I can't keep watching people treat you as something expendable, something they can threaten or diminish. And I can't keep pretending that what I feel for you is purely professional or that I'm content with the careful distance we've been maintaining." My breath caught. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I want to claim you, officially, permanently, in every way that matters. Not because I think you need protecting, you're strong enough to handle yourself, but because I want the world to know you're mine, that anyone who threatens you will answer to me. Because I want to wake up beside you, build a life with you, make decisions with you, because you've become essential to my existence in a way I never anticipated and can't imagine living without." The intensity of his declaration left me speechless. Claiming bonds were permanent, life-altering commitments that went far beyond human concepts of marriage. They were biological, magical, irreversible. "Darren, we've only known each other a few weeks. That's a massive decision. Are you absolutely certain?" "I've never been more certain of anything." He pressed his forehead against mine, his scent wrapping around me like a protective shield. "I know the timeline seems rushed. I know there are 1,000 logical reasons. Wait, but I also know that from the moment I saw you challenge Maurice in that conference room, something in me recognized something in you. And every day since has only confirmed that initial instinct. You're my match, Billy. My equal, my partner, my other half." Tears blurred my vision, not from sadness, but from overwhelming emotion. For my entire life, I'd been treated as disposable, as less than, as someone whose worth had to be constantly proven. And here was one of the most powerful alphas in the country, offering me permanence, offering me a bond that said I was irreplaceable. I want this too. God help me, I want this more than I've ever wanted anything. But are you prepared for what this means? The scrutiny, the gossip, the accusations that I used the bond to advance my career. Let them talk. Darren's voice was fierce. Let them speculate and whisper and judge. I know the truth, that you've earned every opportunity through merit and intelligence, that our bond is built on genuine connection, not manipulation. And anyone who suggests otherwise will learn very quickly that I don't tolerate disrespect toward my Omega. My Omega. The possessive phrase sent shivers through me. Then yes, I want this. I want you. I want the bond, the partnership, the future we could build together. The kiss that followed was nothing like the careful touches we'd shared before. This was claiming in its truest sense, deep, consuming, a promise made physical. His scent flooded my senses, triggering responses in my omega biology that I'd suppressed for years. And when we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, I knew with absolute certainty that I'd just made the most important decision of my life. The bond formed between us in that moment, invisible but undeniable, a connection that would last our lifetimes. Under the stars with the city lights as our witnesses, I found what I'd been searching for without knowing it. Not just an alpha, but a partner. Not just protection, but genuine love. Not just a position, but a home. Forever bound, forever chosen, forever cherished.